So I have a question for you. What made you choose this specialty?
Yeah, so PA school, it's a general education similar to like nursing. So we get an education in medicine in general, and then we can really pick kind of whatever specialty we want to go into. For me, I really loved GI when I was in school, mostly because it encompasses so many different things. So a lot of specialties focus like, obviously on one particular organ. So like cardiology, for example, focuses just on the heart. Now, I shouldn't say just on the heart because that's like, it's a pretty important one. So there's a lot that goes into that. But in the world of GI, we're dealing with a lot of different organ systems. So esophagus, stomach, small intestine, large intestine, pancreas, gallbladder, liver. So there's just a lot that goes into it, which basically just translates that I get to see patients from a lot of different areas every day. So my days are, they're exciting because I get a lot of different things and I don't feel like I'm seeing the same exact thing every day.
Going off of that, what does a typical day at work look like for you?
Yeah, so most of my job, I would say probably 90 to 95% of my job is outpatient medicine, meaning working in an ambulatory office, so like a doctor's office that you would typically think about. So that's like 90 to 95%, and then the other 5 to 10% is inpatient. So occasionally I'll do a couple of days inpatient a month, just kind of helping to cover the GI service. So patients that are admitted to our hospital that have some sort of a GI complaint. But on a day-to-day normally, I start at like 8:30 and I see patients in half-hour time slots. I'm really lucky. I get half-hour time slots for my patient visits. So I see them in half-hour time slots, and then usually I'm done around 4:30 or so. So yeah, just seeing patients, addressing whatever issues they have, obviously charting and doing all of the documentation and those sorts of things. And then on top of that, answering what seems like hundreds of questions that come through from patients in my like in basket or like email sort of thing. Questions that nurses might have for me. There's a lot of different things that I have to authorize and sign and those sorts of things. So the rest of my day is kind of there, but the vast majority of it is direct patient care.
So we have a question in the chat that's, can you tell your reason for choosing PA over MD? And I'll add NP to that question as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, I grew up in the middle of nowhere in a cornfield in Ohio. And so I had never actually even heard of PAs growing up, and like was just set that I was going to med school. Got to undergrad, and one of my best friends in my undergrad biology program, her mom is a PA, and so she kind of was like, "Yeah, I'm going to PA school," and I was like, "I have no idea what that even is." So she told me about it, and I kind of started researching it, and immediately I was like, "This is it! Like, what? This is it! This is what I want to do." So there are a lot of reasons I think that people kind of choose one or the other. Some of the highlights in terms of PA are we can switch specialties whenever we want to. So my first job out of PA school was actually with an internal medicine like hospitalist team, basically caring for people that were admitted to the hospital on nights. Not for me. I did not do very well on working on nights. So that was my first job. And then I basically just decided, hey, I want to switch and go into GI. So I applied for GI jobs and made the switch. So that's a big one. Schooling is definitely a big one as well. So PA programs are a much abridged version of medical school. So most PA programs are usually between 24 and 27 months long. And I can talk more about that if that's something you guys are interested in. But so a lot less schooling, and I get to do all the things that I love to do in medicine, and I don't have to do a lot of the things that I would not have enjoyed about medicine. So for me, it was kind of a perfect you know, a perfect role for me. I also love that I get a lot more time with my patients. Now that's kind of a generalization, but most of the time, doctors don't have the luxury of spending as much time with patients one-on-one as I do, and I really like that. I really like building that relationship and being able to. There's a lot of education that I get to do with patients and explaining kind of things and walking them through different seasons, both good and bad. So those were all kind of the things that were, to me, appealing as far as PA and MD. As far as NP goes, so PAs and NPs do practically the exact same job. So my team currently, we have 11 what we call APPs, or Advanced Practice Provider. That's kind of an umbrella that encompasses both PAs and nurse practitioners. So we do the exact same job, and the pay is pretty much the same. So the biggest difference is the way that we're educated. So PAs are educated in a model that is much more close to like the traditional medical school model, whereas nurse practitioners are educated more on like a nursing model. So they both have their strengths, they both have their weaknesses. For me, in my undergrad was a biology major, and so it was a much more natural kind of transition for me to go into PA school. Whereas most nurses or most nurse practitioners were nurses first. So they were nurses for a season of life and then decided to go back to school. So not to say that you couldn't switch. I mean, I had like 2 people in my PA program that I graduated with had been nurses beforehand, and then they chose to go the PA route as opposed to the NP route.
Another question is, where did you attend your undergrad?
Yeah, so my undergrad is here in Indiana. So I went to Anderson University, which is a small liberal arts university here in Indiana. And then I went to Trevecca Nazarene University, which is in Nashville, Tennessee, for PA school.
Awesome. And then did you take a gap year? Why or why not?
So fun story. So I actually applied to PA school twice. The first time was right after, basically I applied my senior year of undergrad, and I was waitlisted at a university, and in the meantime met a girl, and we ended up getting engaged. And so then we got engaged and we were like planning our wedding, and then they were like, hey, you're off the wait list, like you can have this spot if you want to. And then I said, get married or go to PA school. Get married sounds a lot more fun. So I went that route, and then basically just like deferred on PA school. My wife had 1 more year of undergrad, so that kind of took me out for like the way that PA school applications work. I graduated undergrad in 2014, and then I started PA school in 2016. So I did take a bit of a gap for that reason.
How long did it take you to get all of your required patient care experience / shadowing / other volunteer hours?
So there's a lot of different ways that you can get these hours, and you would be surprised at the things that actually would count. So the more traditional things that you could do would be to be like a CNA, a nursing aide, a tech, an EMT, an MA, so a medical assistant, even just like working in a doctor's office, as long as you have some sort of patient contact, that would count. Phlebotomy, lab sciences, those sorts of things. So mine was actually kind of unique. I worked at a summer camp while I was an undergrad, and the camp was for adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And so because every single person that attended camp had multiple medical diagnoses, I was able to practically count every hour that I spent there as patient contact hours. And so the first summer I was just kind of like a general camp counselor sort of thing. And then the second summer that I worked there, I worked as like a nurse's aide. I didn't have I wasn't a trained nurse's aide, or I didn't go to a program or anything like that. I was kind of more of like I guess like nursing intern sort of thing. But all of those hours were able to count because of the uniqueness of that situation.
So how many hours did you end up having when you applied?
A lot. I don't exactly remember the number, but because of how unique my situation was, it was like an astronomically high number. That is by far not the norm. Most people, I would say, like, I don't even know what PA schools are requiring now in terms of hours. When I applied, it was kind of between like a 500 to 1,000 hours. And most people were kind of around there. It wasn't something that you had to like, I showed up with 30,000 hours and you know what I mean? So it was kind of, as long as you kind of meet that level, then you were okay. I think personally, I think I logged like, it might have been like 3,500 hours or something like that.
So here's another question. During your gap year, did you do anything? If so, what did you do to ensure that you'd be accepted the next time you applied?
No. So I got married and then I worked as an undergraduate admissions counselor for the university that I graduated from. So I didn't necessarily do any like I didn't get a job in healthcare necessarily, but I did spend time during that season. I did do some extra shadowing of PAs and people in the medical field, and so I was able to kind of beef things up a little bit there. I also did take the GRE for a second time during that season, but that's pretty much it. I didn't do like I didn't go out and get like a job working in healthcare because again, I already had the majority of those hours that I needed done.
And then there's another question which I missed. Back to when you mentioned that there were some things that you don't want to do as an MD that you don't have to do as a PA. Someone asked what some examples would be of those things that you might have to do as an MD, but not a PA.
Yeah. So this is going to be, it's going to vary obviously with different specialties and different groups and things like that. I personally do not have to be on call ever. And so most specialties that you go into as an MD, you're going to at least go through some sort of season of having to be on call. I don't have to be on call, which means that my schedule is a lot more flexible. The hours are much more set in stone as opposed to what a lot of the doctors that I work with are. And for me personally, I really love being where I'm at kind of in the food chain. So I love having responsibility. I love having autonomy. I love being able to make decisions and see my own patients and all of those sorts of things. I also love the fact that I know that somebody is there. And so if something were to happen, or if I have a question, or if I'm stumped, I like having that person that I can go to. And the buck doesn't stop with me, basically. So that's kind of a big part of it. And then obviously, like a lot of the doctors have to do a lot more administrative stuff with like hospital networks and those sorts of things that I don't have to do. So for me, it was really about patient care. Like I just really wanted to be with patients and I wanted to, you know, as cheesy as it is, like be able to make a difference in their lives. And so for me, PA was, I get to do all of those things and still live like what I would consider to be mostly a normal life.
I have a question kind of related to that. Like you kind of addressed it, but how would you say like your relationship is like with the physicians? Like how often do you get to like do things on your own versus like when you consult them for certain things, if that makes sense?
Yeah. So again, every specialty and every group is going to be a little bit different. But in my office, I'm the only one that patients see. So like my patients come in, they see me. I don't like go to the doctor unless I basically have a question or something comes up. You know, there are obviously some patients that are really complex that I'm able to then say like, hey, this is kind of out of my scope. And I really think that you need to see the doctor. But I have complete autonomy in that I see my own patients. I manage their care. I order tests. I interpret those tests. I prescribe medications. I mean, all of those things I get to do on my own, but I have them there if I need something or if I have a question.
There are a couple other questions. What are some prerequisites for PA school that you took in addition to your degree?
Yeah, so this is one of the most frustrating parts about PA school, I remember, in terms of applying, is that schools would have these random prerequisites that there are some obviously that like most every school is going to require. And those, if you're getting like a biology degree or a science degree, the vast majority of those are going to kind of be built into your major. But then there are some others that most of them will require. So they'll require so many humanities type courses. So like sociology, they'll require like a decent amount of psychology classes, those sorts of things. But what's frustrating or what's hard is that you'll look at a school and they'll require a class and they'll be like the only one on your list that requires that class. So it takes a little bit of planning. Well, you could do it one of two ways. So you could either look at it and say, these are the schools that I'm going to apply on or apply to. I'm dead set. These are the schools I want to apply to. And then just make sure that you have all of those prereqs. Or you kind of get like a general consensus of these are the classes that most schools are going to require. You do those, and then you look through and say, okay, which ones do I qualify for? If I have to take one extra class, is that worth it for me to take that one extra class? Just kind of depends. But for example, like I had to do a statistics class for one school. One school required abnormal psychology, which is a really fun class. I actually really like that. But so it just kind of depends on each school has their own kind of requirements. Some schools require like a medical terminology class. Other schools, don't require that. Obviously, most PA schools are going to require that you do like anatomy, physiology, those sorts of things. So there will be that core class kind of roster that most of them will require. And then there's just those extra ones that certain schools add in.
How many schools did you apply to, and what advice do you have for PA applicant interviews?
Yeah, so I applied to probably the second time around, I probably applied to maybe I think 8 schools, which I would say is pretty average. You definitely want to apply to a good amount of schools because PA school is extremely competitive. And I don't say that to be like, whatever. And I don't say that to like scare you into it, but it definitely is something that, most programs have approximately like 50 spots. And for example, my school had 50 spots, and on average every year, like 2,200 people apply. So there's a lot of people that are wanting to get into PA school. So you want to kind of, cast a pretty big net. Obviously you don't want to apply to like every school just because that's not, it's just not financially possible because you have to pay for applications and those sorts of things. But just having a pretty open mind and saying, okay, these are the schools that I'm willing to like do the application and move forward in the process with. And then as far as recommendations for like interviews specifically, what I always tell people is to go online and look. There are lists of like most common PA school interview questions, and make sure that you have really good answers for those things. There are obviously going to be questions that schools are going to ask you. They'll ask you questions that kind of throw you off, questions that you can't really prepare for. But there are a couple of questions that pretty much across the board, every PA program that I go to and interview for, they're going to ask me like X, Y, Z. So for example, every single time that you're at a PA school interview, they're going to say, what's a PA? Tell me what a PA is. Tell me in your own words, what is a PA? What do they do? And then they're also going to ask you, why do you want to be a PA? Sometimes they'll even say like, why did you choose PA over other healthcare careers that you could have gone into? So having good answers specifically for those two questions, I think is really important because it shows that you actually are committed to becoming a PA, and that it's not like they can tell really quickly the people that are applying to PA school because they didn't get into medical school. They can tell that really fast, and that's not the kind of person that they want, right? So they want the people that are passionate about being a PA, not just as like a backup plan. I had like 3 people in my PA program that actually did get into medical school, went to medical school and dropped out, didn't flunk out, but dropped out because they realized that this is not what I signed up for. This isn't for me. And then came to PA school.
Another question, do you see PA being a good career in the next 10 years? I know the job demand is getting higher, but that doesn't always mean it is desirable.
Absolutely. Absolutely, I do. So I have never second guessed my decision to become a PA, have never regretted it, have never thought like, oh, I really wish I would have done something else, or I really wish I would have gone to medical school. We, especially right now, just in healthcare, those baby boomers are getting, they're just getting older every day. And with that comes a lot more need for healthcare providers. And it's no secret that COVID really kind of threw a wrench into plans and a lot of people left and those sorts of things. So there is always going to be a need for people that work in healthcare, and there's likely always going to be not enough doctors to fill those spots. So I think we are positioned really well in that the healthcare field needs us, and I don't see that changing.
And then how does training for a specialty work?
So there are some specialties that, so there are PA residencies. Not every PA is going to do a PA residency. I would actually say it's the minority of people are going to like graduate PA school and then go to a PA residency. Those people, it really just kind of depends like what sort of specialty. I've never really seen where it was like absolutely required that you had done a residency. But for example, like I have I precept students, so I have like PA students that come and work with me. And he just recently got offered a job in cardiothoracic surgery, and they asked him to do a residency before he would start his job. There are ER residencies, and then I would say the other big one are neonatal residencies, so people wanting to work in NICUs and those sorts of things. So in those instances, then there are those specific like residency programs, not nearly as long as like a medical residency for doctors, but that same kind of idea of getting kind of that on the job training, or intensive care is another one. So like working in ICUs and those sorts of things, there are residencies for that. That's kind of common, but like the majority of the time, it's just on the job training. So for example, when I got my GI job, it was really just kind of on the job training, and it wasn't, I didn't have to do like a residency or anything like that. I just learned from the doctors there and from the other APPs or advanced practice providers within our group.
Another question just came through. Did you work while you were a PA student?
I did not. So some PA programs actually like require you to basically sign a paper saying that you won't work because PA school is so intense. We are basically doing 4 years of medical school in 15 months. And so it's just extremely rigorous. And so some schools will actually go as far as to like require that you don't work. That my program didn't require that we didn't work. I had a couple of friends that did still work, but it was more like like a bartender on the weekends or something like that. Like working at a store or something like that, just like on the weekend. It wasn't like there's really no way that you could do like a full-time or really even like a traditional part-time sort of role and then also go to PA school, because it was basically my full-time job. So I was at school from like 8 to 5 every day, Monday through Friday. And then that obviously doesn't include studying afterwards and those sorts of things.
Besides your high amount of patient care experience, what other things do you think made you stand out as an applicant for PA school?
Yeah, that's a good question. I am the kind of person that like I am not afraid to admit that I'm not the smartest person in the room. And I'm very open to admit, like my faults and those sorts of things. So I am kind of for me, I knew if I can get an interview, I'll be fine. Because on paper, am I the best candidate? No, but was I good enough at least to get an interview? Because I knew that if I got an interview, I felt pretty confident that I would be able to kind of get myself there by just being authentic, like who I am, and being able to kind of portray that. And I was just really, really honest. I mean, when I was talking to them, a funny story that I always like tell people is I had C's when I was an undergrad, and they were both in chemistry. I'm awful at chemistry, so bad. And so there's hope for you. If you're bad at chemistry, don't let the world tell you that you have to be good at it. So I went to my PA school interview at Tribeca, where I ended up going for undergrad. And the admissions director was sitting across the table, and she was just like, so let's talk about these chemistry grades, like what was going on there. And I just was like, yeah, let's talk about it. I personally don't think that chemistry exists. So that's why I didn't do very good on it, and whatever. And just kind of like got them laughing about it. And then, I was like, in all honesty, chemistry does not come naturally to me at all. It is by far the hardest class. Like those were by far the hardest classes for me. So I'm honestly proud of the C's, because I know that I worked the best that I could, and that was the grade that I could get. And I think that they really appreciated that kind of honesty. And I was like, if I just make you laugh at it, then maybe it'll just slide under the table and you won't focus on the fact that I didn't get the best grades in chemistry. But
what advice would you give for reaching out to PAs for shadowing?
yeah, so it's going to be obviously different with everyone, but I think it's just trying to make those connections in some sort of like a natural way. Now, obviously, that's not always going to be the case. There are going to be times when you're probably going to have to just like, hey, randomly reaching out, is there any way that I could shadow? Most PAs are going to be kind of open to that, because we all have been there. But I would definitely say that if you kind of can get yourself in connection with them in like a more natural way, whether that be like a friend of a friend or a family friend, or a PA that you see at your primary care office or something like that, that can kind of get you connected that way, or like even alumni of your school or those sorts of things, like being able to get connected in those sort of circumstances, I think are helpful. There's also I'm trying to remember. There's an app that I just actually like recently downloaded. It's MedSembly, but a lot of people post on there basically saying like, hey, I'm looking for shadowing hours here, or there's a bunch of different Facebook groups and things like that for people that are interested in being a PA, and people will post like, hey, I'm in the Indianapolis area. Would anyone be open to me coming and shadowing, or sitting down and having coffee? Like I did that. I shadowed with a guy, and then I also was just like, would you be willing to sit down and have coffee with me, just so that I can kind of ask you questions and bounce things off of you, and just kind of learn a little bit more about what your day-to-day life is like.
What would you say like the hardest thing about being a PA is, and like your favorite part, if you can choose one? It's probably hard.
Yeah. I would say the hardest part about being a PA in general, which is funny because I talked about how much I like it earlier, it is sometimes difficult to be, the nature of the job is that I am in a lot of scenarios a middleman. So, I have a lot of responsibility, but I also don't have the final say. And so there is some of that, like, this is what the patient wants, this is what the doctor says. I have to kind of be the guy in the middle, trying to get those to line up with each other, which can be challenging at times. Still obviously love my job. It's not anything that like I come home, hating what I do or anything like that. I think that this is just more working in healthcare than specifically being a PA, but it's very difficult when you basically like do all that you can for a patient, but ultimately they are the ones that have to make the decision to either like change the way that they do the way that they're living their lifestyle, or sometimes patients will choose to forego therapy for a certain reason and things like that. And it's difficult because you can only control so much, and you kind of have to just sit there and almost like watch it happen, which is really hard. In terms of the things that I love, I get to make people feel better. Like I know that sounds so cheesy, but it's like every day I get to go to work and I get to make people feel better holistically. And my kind of life goal or mantra, or I guess whatever you want to call it, is basically I want everyone that I come in contact with to be seen, heard, loved, and know that they matter. And so for me, that's my goal every single day, is that I want every patient interaction, I want them to walk away feeling seen and heard and cared for, and known. And so I get to do that every day, which to me is just like the best. And we as healthcare workers and as PAs are invited into a really unique place. People invite us into those really good and really hard seasons of their lives. I work in GI. People come and talk to me about their poop all the time. No one really likes to talk about their poop, right? It's something that's, well, I guess there are some people out there, but like the majority of people, that's not something that they want to talk about. They don't want to talk about going to the bathroom. They don't want to talk about throwing up. They don't want to talk about, like, it's kind of, there's this like embarrassing stigma around a lot of GI. And so I love that I get to kind of step into that space with a patient and I say, hey, like, we're just going to make you feel better. You can talk to me about these things. It doesn't bother me. It's literally what I do. Like, I'll tell you the last time I went to the bathroom, if that's going to make you feel more comfortable, so it just, I get to be in that space that a lot of people just naturally don't really like, people don't just volunteer those sorts of things most of the time. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
Does anybody else have any questions?
Oh, I have one last question. Do you ever have like patients who maybe like don't know what a PA is, or like is kind of like, where's the doctor, like kind of has like a stigma like against PAs and like kind of treats you maybe like differently than they would a doctor? Like, do you see that a lot, or do you feel like most people kind of like have a good understanding of like what a PA is and like what they can do and like all the qualifications?
Yeah, that's a really great question. It is honestly very much a mixed bag. So there are definitely still times where I come in and they're like, so what is a PA? Like, what does a PA stand for? And so then I kind of explain, like, this is what it means, this is what I do, those sorts of things. It's rare that I have somebody that is just like outright like, I don't want to see you. Especially because by the time I'm seeing them, they've already been scheduled. So somebody from our office has said, hey, you're going to be meeting with Josh. He's one of our PAs, kind of like walk them through that. So like very rarely have I ever had somebody actually in my office just be like, no, absolutely not. Like, I don't want to see you. And in those moments, you kind of have to just like check your ego kind of at the door and say, like, that is true. Like, I am not a doctor. And if you feel more comfortable meeting with the doctor, then you certainly can. I guess kind of the humor in it, or I guess the funny part of that, is that the reality is that most of my patients prefer to see PAs as opposed to seeing doctors for those reasons that I was able to, like, that I shared with you guys earlier. I'm able to spend a lot more time with them. I'm able to really sit down and kind of educate them and not just like, this is what's going on, this is what we're going to do, see you in 3 months. I get to kind of spend that extra amount of time with them, which I think they really like. And the reality is too, okay, you can definitely see a doctor. You're going to be waiting for like 4 months to get scheduled, or you could see Josh like in 2 weeks, and then you can like hear them on the phone. They're just like, oh, okay, well, all right, we'll do that. And I'm never going to try to convince somebody. It's just not my style. So if somebody is like really passionate, and I tell people in my office this too, like when they're scheduling, if somebody's fighting you on it, it's okay to educate them, but do not try to convince them that I'm like good enough for them, because then I'm kind of starting in the hole and I almost have to kind of dig myself out, during that patient interaction or during that visit. So it's rare that it happens. And most of the time, like when I was in PA school, I had a preceptor, he was a physician, and there was a patient that was like, no, I don't want to see the PA student. I only want to see the doctor. And he went in and was basically just like, the only way that I got to where I was that I learned. I went to school and I got experience. So if you don't want to have them as part of your care, then you can find a different doctor. So a lot of physicians really do go to bat for us. And I think that that's really helpful. My docs all the time are saying, like, you're in good hands with so-and-so, or, our APPs are amazing. They're going to take good care of you. So luckily, it's not something we come up against a lot, but it does certainly exist.
Another question in the chat. Would you say some PA specialties are more competitive than others?
I would say probably, yeah, that there are certainly those jobs that are like highly sought after, or where they just might not be as many PAs in general. For example, like everyone wants to work in dermatology. It's just like everyone wants to do it. And I am like the opposite of that. I'm like, it's red and it itches and it could be 1,000 things. You could be totally fine tomorrow, or this could kill you overnight. I don't really know. So dermatology, not my strong suit by any means, but that is one specialty that like is kind of sought after. And then some of the more like subspecialty surgeries, so things like cardiothoracic surgery, where there's just not as many, openings and things like that. Neurosurgery, those sorts of things. There's a lot of ortho. So a lot of people really want to do ortho as well. I've never really heard that ortho is like a hard one to get in necessarily, but that's a pretty common specialty for PAs. But the reality is that there are PAs in practically every specialty out there. So,
do you know why NPs have full autonomy, but PAs do not?
We're going there. Okay. So in a how do I guess condense that? So we do the exact same job, and really the only difference is that technically a nurse practitioner could open up a practice, and this varies state to state, so it's not even the case in all the states. But in a lot of places, a nurse practitioner could go off on their own, open up a practice, and be fine. Whereas a PA could still do that. PAs go out, they open up practices, but they do have a physician on board as well. That doesn't mean that the physician has to be on site, but they have to be within like a certain amount of time, and you have to be able to contact them if you need them, those sorts of things. But PAs do still open up their own practices and operate their own practices as well. The reasoning behind that really is that the PA profession overall is not that old. And so nurses have been around forever, and nurse practitioners come from that same like body of people, I guess, right? So because the nursing profession is so set, nurse practitioners kind of get to benefit from that, in that their like organization has been around for forever. And so in terms of like legislation and those sorts of things, it was somewhat easier for them to kind of slip stuff through and get stuff through, because that kind of body is so organized, whereas PAs are just a much newer profession. I mean, we've still been around for a long time, but in the grand scheme of things, nurses obviously have been around for much longer, and so therefore nurse practitioners kind of get that benefit.
Going back to the GRE, did you take exams like it, and how did you prepare for that?
So I did take a GRE. I took it twice. The first time I didn't really prepare for it at all, and I did okay. Then the second time that I took it, I did do some stuff. I mean, I didn't go crazy, but I brushed up on some of the math stuff, like things that I had never, I was like, I don't think I've seen this since high school. So I did do some like practice GRE and stuff like that. It's not something that I like poured my heart into, or like, that's not the hill to die on by any means. As far as the GRE goes with most schools, this is kind of a generalization, but for most schools, as long as you meet that minimum requirement, it's not like, it's kind of similar to patient contact. It's more of a, this is our minimum requirement. You have to have this in order to kind of be considered, but it's not that like, oh, you have a 310 and you have a 315, so you are like a much better applicant. It's more just, you kind of have, it's like a hoop kind of that you have to jump through. And not even every school, I don't think, requires the GRE.
What was a typical week in your PA program like?
Yeah, so we went to school Monday through Friday. Our first class started, I think, at 8. And then we were done, I want to say like maybe like 3:30 or 4 most days. Every semester was a little bit different because we were in different classes. So sometimes you would have like an hour break between. There were other days where it was like straight. We basically just like went all day long, and doing in the classroom learning, and then also different labs and things like that. So for example, we had like anatomy lab, cadaver lab. So we would have those at different times throughout the week. Or we had a skills lab where we learned how to do a lot of procedures. So suturing, putting in catheters, doing spinal taps, drawing blood, starting IVs, removing toenails. I mean, like all of these different like procedure sorts of things that we learned, those were kind of built into the week as well. So for me, my norm was basically wake up, go to school, come home, eat dinner with my wife, and then go to Starbucks, and then I basically closed down Starbucks every day at PA school. So I mean, it's not glorious, but it's reality. But yeah, so that was kind of my typical week. And then you don't usually have like stuff on the weekends in terms of sometimes on your clinical year. So the way that PA school is structured, I don't know if you guys are super familiar or not at all, but basics. You have the didactic portion, which is the classroom portion, and that's usually like 15 months. And then you have the clinical year, which is 12 months typically. I mean, schools are going to have different, but for the most part, it's like 15 months for the in-classroom stuff and then 12 months of clinicals. So during clinicals, if your preceptor works on a weekend, then you would be expected to work on a weekend, but never did we have like weekend classes or anything like that.
So there was a question similar to that. During PA school, are you allowed to go home for Christmas or Thanksgiving? Are the breaks typical of like undergraduate, or is it full-time?
Yeah, good question. So we did have breaks. So we had like Thanksgiving break, we had Christmas break, we had spring break. So we did have breaks, like usually between semesters we would get some time off, whether that's like a long weekend or like a week or something like that. We did get a decent amount of time for Christmas, but you are going to school through the summer. So it's not something where like you get a summer off and then you go back. You are still going to school through the summer.
How long did it take for you to find a job as a new grad, and was gastro your first choice or your first job?
Yeah, so for me, I had connections so like I said, I live here in Indianapolis. It's where I went to undergrad. And so I had shadowed a PA when I was in undergrad and kind of made that connection. So when I graduated, I moved back and kind of reached out to him and said, hey, I'm back, would love a job, please hire me. Because at that point he was like in an administrative role. So for me, I graduated in August. I took the PANCE, which is the National Certification Exam, and I took that in August. And then I think I probably had a position, like they had offered me a job in September. With PA or with anything in healthcare, you have to do credentialing, which basically for most places is 90 days. So after they offer you a job, typically there's a 90-day process where you're having to fill out paperwork and get approved for like to have be accepted by insurance companies and those sorts of things, and get privileges at the hospital network that you're working at and those sorts of things. So it's for me, I basically got a job but didn't actually start it until like close to Christmas that year.
Do you think that you ever switch specialties?
I could see myself doing it. I could see myself getting into something else. I don't really have, like right now, I don't have a plan to do it, but there are things that I think I would like to do in the future. I would like to potentially work in like primary care or something where I get to do more procedure-based stuff. I really like doing those sorts of things, and I don't really do that in my current role. So I could see myself doing something like that. Two of my best friends are actually in medical school right now, and so we always kind of joke like, whichever one of you is going to offer me the most money, when you get out of here, like I'll work for you, sort of thing. So we'll just kind of see, but as of right now, I don't have a plan to switch. But again, I could wake up tomorrow and decide I wanted to do, I don't know, something else, and just apply for those jobs and then be good to go.
This is a question about like applying to PA school. If PAs aren't really compared on like testing scores or PCE, then what do you think they are compared on? Like what makes that decision of whether or not you get the interview?
Yeah, so obviously they are going to look at those things, but they're going to interview a lot more people than what they've got spots for. So as long as you're meeting those kind of benchmarks, that's going to set you up for being able to get an interview. Now, I would say that most schools are, because they get so many applicants, right? Pretty much everyone that applies to PA school is smart. Everyone pretty much has obviously done patient contact hours. Everyone, for the most part, has always wanted to work in healthcare, those sorts of things. So it's kind of like, how do you set yourself apart, and how do you help them to see that you like are a good fit holistically and not just academically? Because ultimately, anyone can learn medicine, right? So that's just something that you can learn. Not everyone can learn how to be a human with like good interpersonal skills. Now, that doesn't mean that all PAs are like, or all medical providers in general. It doesn't mean that we're all like great interpersonally or that we all have good communication, those sorts of things, but it definitely is something that they look for, because again, pretty much everyone in the application pool is going to be like qualified. So it's more of how do you kind of stand out and help them to see why it is that you would make a good PA.
And then another question, did you find the environment of PA school competitive, or was it a more supportive environment with other PA students?
Yeah, that's a good question. So it was very much supportive. So, and that was one of the biggest differences in like those people that I was saying went to medical school and then eventually left and came to PA school. Because it was this like cutthroat environment, and they basically at the beginning were saying like, we accept X amount, but we're only going to graduate X amount. So you have to like be in that top whatever. And so it was really kind of a cutthroat environment. And obviously, like I've got, like I said, two of my best friends are in medical school right now, and they've said the same thing, where it is kind of that like you feel like you're competing against each other. And to a degree you are, because they have to apply to residencies, right? So for PAs, it's kind of like, once we get into PA school, I don't care. I want us all to pass, right? So it's very, very like team oriented. My program was for sure, where we all kind of had this mentality of like, I don't care who, is top in the class, and I don't care who the last one is, because you know what, whoever's the bottom of the class, as long as they graduate, they get that white coat and they pass that test, they're doing the exact same job that we're doing. So, it's more of a, how do we just get us all through it? So, like making study guides and sharing them with everyone, and like, doing big study sessions and working with each other, trying to make sure that we all, got the material. So I found PA school to be like the worst like year of my life, but in a very supportive setting with people that were really like, they cared and they wanted me to do well.
Anyone have any last questions? We went through everything in the chat.
So if you guys do think of any questions, I'm always open to answering anything. So you can get my contact information, or however you want to do that. My students that I precept for have been for the past year, have tried to convince me to start a GI TikTok. I recently gave in and actually did that. So this is not me saying go follow me on TikTok, because I'm probably not that funny, but you can reach me there. And if you have questions or things like that, that's a pretty easy way for you to message me. And I'd be more than happy to help in any way that I can.
A couple last minute questions just came through, actually. Okay, first of all, what's your TikTok?
It is the Gastro Ginger PA. And yeah, don't make fun of me. My name's Josh Smith. I would love for you guys to try to come up with a username for the name Josh Smith. So usually I have to throw the fact that I'm a ginger in there. It at least makes usernames a little bit more available. So I'll type it in here in this chat thing.
And then another question. Do you think that having a science degree as an undergrad helped prepare you for PA school?
Definitely. Yeah. So I thought it did, because so much of college is like learning how to learn, right? And so the science courses are pretty rigorous in getting you prepared for that. Now, there were certainly still people in my PA program that had undergrad degrees in other things, because the reality is like you still have to have those prerequisites. So you still have to have taken most of those science classes anyway. So it's not necessarily a requirement. It's certainly the easiest way to do it, just because it like the prereqs are kind of built into it, as opposed to, like I have a friend who was like an English major or like a music major and then went to PA school. And they were like, well, yeah, it was nice, but I also had to do a lot of extra stuff because, I went back, and then I think they were like later in life decided to go PA route. So they had to go back to take some of those prereqs, but it's kind of like built in if you do it in the science.
And then our last question, what is the most important piece of advice you'd want to give us as pre-PA students?
That's a good question. So this is probably my, like I said, when I graduated undergrad, I was an admissions counselor for 2 years. And I brought this up when I was in my PA school interviews, and I think that it really clicked with them. So my advice for students when I was trying to help them find an undergrad was basically not to basically find a school that was going to prepare you to be the person that you wanted to be, because you're going to get a good education anywhere. So I always encourage people, like, take some time, sit down, meditate, reflect, whatever that thing is for you, and basically come up with, okay, in 5 or 10 years, who do I want to be? Not like what job necessarily do I want to have, but what kind of person do I want to be? What kind of PA do I want to be? And then find a school that's going to create that in you. Because again, you're going to get an education pretty much any PA school you go to, but it's bigger than just learning the medicine, right? It's what kind of qualities do I want to have? What kind of characteristics do I want to have as a human being? And what program is going to get me there? So I think really having kind of that introspective thought process and just thinking like, okay, obviously I want to be a PA, I want to get into PA school, but it's more than just that. Like, what kind of PA do I want to be? Not specialty, but just like, it's really important for me to be compassionate, or it's really important for me to have X, Y, Z. And then it's about finding a program that's going to help you to be that.
How many hours do you work a week, and do you get benefits, PTO, healthcare, etc.?
Yeah, so I work like a standard 40-hour work week. Yes, I get benefits. I get PTA, which is kind of the same thing as PTO, but paid time away. Healthcare, like insurance, I'm assuming is what the question is. And yes, I do get that. Most anywhere you're going to get those things, especially if you're full-time. Now, if people are like part-time, it changes and you might not get as much or whatever. But for me personally, I have a pretty great like benefits package with, I think, like almost 5 weeks off a year, which is pretty nice. And then, obviously like insurance and those sorts of things. But
Well, thank you so much. Oh, another one just came in. Do you feel like you have a good amount of free time / work-life balance?
So that's a fun question right now. So I have a 6-week-old baby, and then a 2.5-year-old. So I'm a dad of 2 boys, and then we have a dog. So my work-life balance is a lot more life than work these days, just because there's so much that has to go into that. but yeah, I really do. I feel like I've got a good work-life balance. My first job, like I said, was on nights. That was a really interesting schedule because we would do 7 12-hour shifts in a row. So we were 7 nights on, so from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. For a whole week, and then we had 2 weeks off, and that was kind of the schedule. So you'd work a week, 2 weeks off, work a week, 2 weeks off. Some people really love that. I was a zombie all the time, like just could not, it just did not work for me very well. So for me, I love that I have like a 9 to 5 kind of mentality. Like I go to work, I'm there, I leave. Like sometimes, yeah, I have to stay late, especially if I had a really like difficult patient encounter, or like I get behind on charting and those sorts of things. But there are a lot of tools and things like that that help with work-life balance. It's very easy to let it kind of consume you and kind of take over. So you have to be really good at kind of setting up those boundaries. But there's a lot of things that people can put in place to kind of help you with that. So for example, I have a scribe. So he helps me with most of my documentation. So that is a helpful thing for me, that I'm not sitting there like having to document for hours at the end of the day. But I have a good work-life balance, decent amount of free time that's taken up now by children, but it's still, I guess, technically free time.
Well, thank you so much for coming. We've all really much enjoyed having you.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. If you guys ever need
Thank
anything,
you.
more than happy to help.
Everyone, we will see you in 2 weeks. Have a great rest of your 2 weeks, I guess.